The 22nd of June, 1941. At the crack of dawn, the German Wehrmacht crossed the border into the Soviet Union, initiating Operation Barbarossa. From the air, panzer divisions rolled across the flatlands of Belarus, tanks gleaming in the early morning sun, engines humming like a well-tuned orchestra. Reconnaissance reports filtered in from the vanguard. Soviet armor was present. But when the first German scouts caught sight of the enemy, laughter broke out. The Soviets, it seemed, were fielding what the German troops mockingly called tin cans, flimsy, lightly armored tanks that barely looked capable of standing up to a Panzer III or IV. For the German tank crews, confidence was intoxicating. Years of blitzkrieg successes in Poland, France, and the Balkans had forged a sense of invincibility. In every engagement, the German armor had been dominant, fast, and lethal. The prospect of facing Soviet tanks appeared almost farcical. Officers noted in their field reports how these T-26 seconds and BT-7 seconds seemed fragile, often exposed and poorly coordinated. Soldiers would joke in letters home about playing soccer with Soviet tanks, believing that the heavy steel of a Panzer IV's 75mm gun could slice through these vehicles with ease. Yet, beneath the laughter, a subtle unease began to emerge among the seasoned German officers. Reports hinted at something different, something not immediately obvious to the casual observer. There were whispers of a new Soviet design, one that might combine speed, armor, and firepower in ways the Wehrmacht had not anticipated. For now, however, such reports were dismissed as exaggerations. Commanders assumed that any Soviet tank capable of posing a real threat would still be rare, scattered, and tactically unsophisticated. The Germans had faced numerically superior foes before. They had triumphed by outmaneuvering and outgunning them. Why should it be any different now? But as the panzer divisions pressed deeper into Soviet territory, the first signs of miscalculation began to show. In small skirmishes, German tanks found themselves taking hits from rounds that seemed to deflect at improbable angles. Shells that should have penetrated armor either bounced off or caused minimal damage. At first, soldiers assumed these were lucky shots or defective Soviet vehicles. Little did they know, this was the beginning of a revelation that would shake their understanding of armored warfare to its core. By mid-1941, intelligence reports reached German headquarters detailing the Soviets' new armored developments. German field officers, however, treated these reports with skepticism. Descriptions of fast-moving, sloped armored tanks sounded more like rumors than reality. Some reports even mentioned a prototype capable of mounting a 76.2mm gun while maintaining remarkable mobility. To many Wehrmacht officers, this seemed implausible. The standard expectation, according to decades of armored doctrine, was that heavier guns and thicker armor would inevitably slow a tank down. Soviet engineers, in the German mind, could not possibly defy these rules. Meanwhile, across the Ural Mountains, Soviet factories were already churning out the T-34, a tank designed for simplicity, mass production, and survivability on the Eastern Front. Mikhail Koshkin, the chief designer at the Kharkiv locomotive factory, had overseen every detail. The T-34 was a marvel of practical engineering. Sloped armor that increased effective thickness, wide tracks that allowed it to traverse mud and snow, and a powerful 76.2mm gun capable of defeating contemporary German armor. Every component was built for durability and ease of maintenance in harsh winter conditions, where the German supply lines would soon be stretched to breaking. But for the German high command, these innovations were invisible until tested on the battlefield. German officers assumed their superior tactics, superior optics, and superior training would render any Soviet design secondary. Early skirmishes reinforced this belief. Encountered Soviet tanks were often older models, poorly coordinated, or abandoned by retreating crews. In the comfortable glow of these initial successes, the Wehrmacht's arrogance deepened. They laughed openly at reports of new Soviet monsters and filed them away as minor curiosities. What the Germans failed to appreciate was the combination of Soviet industrial resilience and forward-thinking design. While Germany had focused on quality and technological precision in a smaller number of vehicles, the Soviets were embracing mass production, practicality, and adaptability. This difference would soon become painfully apparent. Within months, German tank crews would confront a machine that redefined their understanding of armored warfare. The T-34 was no tin can. It was a revelation, a silent, rolling force that could shrug off Panzer rounds, traverse terrain the Germans could barely manage, and strike with deadly efficiency. And the laugh, the mockery that had accompanied the first sightings, would vanish as fear and disbelief took its place. July 1941. German panzer units pushed further into the vast expanses of Ukraine. The sun blazed down on the endless steppe, but the heat of the summer could not match the rising tension among German tank crews. Reports trickled in. Soviet forces were regrouping, and their armor seemed to be performing far beyond expectation. Then came the first real encounter, the clash that would send shockwaves through the Wehrmacht. In the forests near Brody, a German reconnaissance patrol spotted a line of T-34 seconds moving toward them. At first glance, they appeared deceptively simple, even crude, the familiar boxy shape of Soviet tanks. But when the first Panzer IV attempted to engage, the crew realized something was amiss. The 75mm rounds that had torn through T-26 seconds and BT-7 seconds bounced off the T-34's sloped armor. Panicked shouts echoed across the radio as more rounds ricocheted harmlessly. For the first time in the campaign, German soldiers confronted the realization that their superior firepower was not absolute. The T-34 seconds moved with astonishing speed. Their wide tracks allowed them to cross muddy fields that bogged down German tanks. They maneuvered through forested areas and river crossings that the panzer units had assumed were safe avenues for flanking attacks. The Germans had expected to dominate with their disciplined formations and tactical doctrine. But suddenly, every advantage seemed compromised. Officers shouted orders, but the battlefield itself appeared to conspire against them. Field reports from the day painted a picture of confusion and disbelief. One panzer commander wrote, "Our rounds do not penetrate. They move faster than we anticipate. Our flanks are exposed, and our formation falters under their relentless advance." German soldiers who had once laughed at Soviet armor were now scrambling to regroup, witnessing firsthand a level of resilience and mobility that defied their expectations. The T-34 was no longer a rumor. It was a battlefield reality, one that challenged every assumption the Wehrmacht had held about armored warfare. The impact of the T-34 extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. For the first time, German officers faced a tank that could combine speed, armor, and firepower in a way that demanded new tactics. The old rules of engagement, methodical positioning, reliance on superior optics, and disciplined formation maneuvers were suddenly inadequate. German doctrine had been built on predictable enemy behavior, on targeting command tanks and exploiting weaknesses. The T-34 refused to play by those rules. Reports from panzer divisions began to fill German headquarters in Berlin. Intelligence officers noted the staggering adaptability of Soviet armor. Units that had once seemed uncoordinated now moved as cohesive formations, striking swiftly, retreating when necessary, and exploiting terrain in ways that German maps had not anticipated. The Germans realized that engagement ranges were suddenly misleading. Long-range fire often failed to stop these tanks, while short-range maneuvers exposed their own weaknesses. The implications were chilling. Every Panzer IV or III that had assumed dominance was now vulnerable, not just because of the T-34's firepower, but because of its ability to dictate the pace and location of combat. German engineers took note, calculating that their 50mm and 75mm guns, effective against older Soviet models, could not consistently penetrate T-34 armor at standard engagement distances. Field manuals would soon need revisions, and experienced officers would have to retrain their crews for a new, unpredictable type of armored warfare. Meanwhile, the T-34 seconds themselves were surprisingly rugged. Damaged tanks could be repaired in the field, sometimes even under fire. Mechanical failures that would immobilize a panzer were often easily addressed by Soviet crews, trained for rapid improvisation and maintenance under pressure. The combination of industrial simplicity, operational resilience, and battlefield effectiveness created a multiplier effect that German forces had never encountered before. By late summer 1941, the laughter had vanished entirely. Panzer crews spoke in hushed tones about the new Soviet monsters and their seemingly supernatural resilience. Reports emphasized speed, sloped armor, and firepower, but also the psychological impact. German soldiers admitted to feeling unprepared, surprised by a vehicle that seemed to anticipate their every move. The T-34 had forced a reckoning, a rewriting of armored doctrine in real time, as the Wehrmacht realized that victory in the East would not come from firepower alone, but from understanding and countering a tank that redefined the rules of war. August 1941. The vast forests and marshes around Smolensk became the stage for a confrontation that would leave German commanders questioning everything they thought they knew about armored warfare. Panzer units advanced with their usual precision, confident that their superior optics, radio coordination, and disciplined formations would overwhelm the Soviets. Yet, as the first T-34 seconds appeared on the horizon, that confidence began to falter. German gunners aimed their 37mm and 50mm cannons, expecting quick kills as they had on older Soviet tanks. But the T-34 seconds sloped 45mm armor, deflected shells like water on steel. Shock turned to alarm as panzer crews realized that even their 75mm guns, though effective at close range, required multiple shots and perfect aim to penetrate the new Soviet design. Every misfire, every ricochet, fueled the impression that the battlefield had suddenly become unpredictable. What truly unsettled the Wehrmacht was the T-34's combination of speed and maneuverability. Crews could accelerate across muddy terrain that immobilized German tanks. River fords, forest paths, and broken roads no longer restricted Soviet movement. When a German flanking maneuver seemed certain, the T-34 would pivot and exploit an unexpected angle, striking command tanks or isolating panzer units. The battlefield, once controlled by German tactical doctrine, had become a living, breathing enemy that adapted faster than human planning could keep pace. Field reports from the panzer divisions emphasized another chilling factor: coordination. Despite Soviet radio networks being less advanced, tank units moved cohesively, supported by infantry and artillery where possible. German intelligence noted that Soviet crews, even when newly deployed, could execute combined arms tactics effectively, confusing German observers who expected disjointed or improvised maneuvers. This adaptability forced German commanders to rethink engagement distances, ammunition allocation, and reserve positioning. By the end of the week-long battle, the Wehrmacht had suffered more than 200 armored vehicle losses. Panzer crews, once proud of their invincibility, admitted that the T-34 was more than a tank. It was a force multiplier. A mechanical entity that forced the Germans to fight differently, to consider that their technological superiority was no longer guaranteed on the Eastern Front. While German soldiers grappled with the T-34 on the battlefield, engineers and industrial planners studied it with a mixture of awe and frustration. Unlike the Wehrmacht's more mechanically complex Panzer IVs, the T-34 had been designed with simplicity, durability, and mass production in mind. Its Christie suspension allowed for incredible cross-country mobility, wide tracks, dispersed weight effectively, and the sloped armor maximized defensive efficiency without adding excessive mass. Soviet engineers had also prioritized manufacturability. Each T-34 could be produced rapidly, using standardized components, enabling factories to replace battlefield losses almost immediately. By mid-1941, Soviet industrial output was staggering. Hundreds of T-34 seconds rolled off assembly lines every month, each one capable of surviving hits that would destroy panzer units. German intelligence was baffled. Even when capturing damaged tanks, field technicians struggled to reverse engineer them. The main gun, initially a 76.2mm F-34, combined penetration power with reliability under harsh conditions. Unlike German cannons that sometimes jammed or required extensive maintenance, the T-34's gun could fire continuously with minimal downtime. Coupled with the tank's speed, it allowed Soviet crews to execute shoot and scoot tactics, striking German units, then retreating before counterfire could reach them. Another hidden advantage lay in crew ergonomics. German tanks often suffered from cramped interiors, poor ventilation, and limited visibility, reducing combat effectiveness over long engagements. The T-34, while not luxurious, optimized interior space and allowed Soviet crews to operate efficiently under fire. Noise, heat, and fatigue were mitigated through design choices that seemed minor at first, but added up to significant operational endurance. By late 1941, reports sent back to Berlin painted a sobering picture. The T-34 was not just a tactical surprise. It represented a strategic shift in armored warfare. German commanders realized that defeating these tanks required not just brute force or better guns, but a fundamental reassessment of doctrine, coordination, and engineering. The laughing at tin tanks had ceased entirely. The T-34 had forced the Wehrmacht to acknowledge a technological and tactical revolution on the Eastern Front. By November 1941, the Wehrmacht's initial euphoria of blitzkrieg had begun to wane as frostbitten roads and Soviet resistance slowed their advance toward Moscow. German commanders, still reeling from Smolensk, were confronted with another harsh reality. The T-34 was not just surviving, it was thriving under conditions that immobilized much of their own mechanized forces. Soviet tank brigades, though battered and often undermanned, continued to operate in the snow and mud with remarkable efficiency. Their wide tracks prevented them from sinking into icy marshes where German tanks faltered. Panzer crews watched in disbelief as T-34 seconds appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, striking isolated supply columns, artillery positions, and command vehicles before melting back into forested cover. German field reports described the T-34 almost mythically, referring to it as a ghost on tracks, or the Steel Wolf of Moscow. Strategically, the T-34's presence altered German planning. Encirclement tactics that had worked flawlessly in Poland and France failed repeatedly. Attack formations had to be spread wider to avoid ambushes, reducing the concentration of firepower that Panzer doctrine relied upon. Even with numerical superiority, German forces could not compensate for the T-34's mobility, armor, and survivability. The psychological effect on panzer crews was profound. No longer did they feel invincible. Every engagement carried the fear that one miscalculated move could result in catastrophic losses. Soviet commanders exploited this fear. Red Army operations increasingly relied on decentralized decision-making, allowing T-34 crews to take initiative in the field. German units, conditioned to strict command hierarchies, struggled to adapt. This difference in doctrine amplified the technical advantages of the T-34, proving that superior design, combined with operational flexibility, could dictate the pace and outcome of battles, even against a numerically and technologically confident enemy. By the spring of 1942, German intelligence could no longer dismiss the T-34 as a mere nuisance. Reports, post-battle analyses, and field interviews confirmed a truth that would redefine armored warfare. The T-34 had shifted the paradigm from individual tank superiority to battlefield resilience, mobility, and coordination. The Wehrmacht's early laughter at tin tanks had transformed into a grudging respect and fear. The T-34's influence extended beyond the Eastern Front. Allied engineers studied captured or disabled units to extract lessons for future tank design, prioritizing sloped armor, reliability, and mass production. The war's outcome increasingly reflected the industrial and design philosophy behind the T-34, a tank not designed for display or prestige, but for function, adaptability, and strategic impact. German commanders, despite their technological sophistication, had underestimated the Soviet capacity for innovation under constraint. The T-34 proved that battlefield effectiveness is not solely dictated by armor, thickness, or firepower. It is dictated by the synergy of design, crew efficiency, mobility, and the ability to operate under conditions that render an opponent's technology ineffective. As the Red Army's tide began to turn, the T-34 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol. For Soviet soldiers, it represented hope and resilience. For German forces, it embodied the unexpected consequences of underestimating an adversary. Decades later, military historians would recognize the T-34 as the tank that forced the Wehrmacht to rethink everything it had learned about armored warfare. Its legacy continues today, influencing modern main battle tank design, doctrine, and the understanding that adaptability often outweighs raw technological advantage. The laughter of 1941 had faded entirely. In its place was a hard-earned respect, earned on frozen fields, muddy roads, and in the hearts of soldiers who understood that some tin tanks could change the course of history. The T-34 had not only survived, it had redefined what it meant to fight, endure, and prevail in the crucible of war.